It's your Thursday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a great day out there as well. And a really good show coming up. Lots to get to, as we always do. Joined in a little while by Rick Sutton, former head coach for the Mankato West football team, currently the co-head coach of the Farmington football team. Has risen to prominence, his phone's been ringing off the hook. He was the head coach in 1999 when he had a young assistant on his staff named Tim Walz. You might have heard of him, Minnesota governor, now candidate to be the vice president of the United States. That 1999 Mankato West team won the Class 4A state championship. I wanted to know from Rick Sutton what Tim Walz was like as a football coach. This is not a political segment. It's more of a football segment, kind of getting to know what that experience was like, what that season was like a quarter of a century ago. So Rick will join me here in just a few minutes to talk about that. I've got a Naz Reid segment at the end of the show, just kind of thinking ahead, a little thought exercise. He is on the cover of Slam magazine, the cover story. That's what brought him into my attention, and just kind of thinking about what happens with Naz Reid after this year. One of the best, bench players in the entire NBA, sixth man of the year, and one of the most popular Timberwolves players in really franchise history. So what becomes of him after this season is over? First, though, what did I miss? I'm going to disappoint at least one listener out there. I want to read a letter right now from one listener. Rich says, again about the Twins trade deadline. He wrote this a couple days ago. Again about the Twins trade deadline. It's so irrelevant without knowing a thing about what other teams would demand in a trade, and your diatribe didn't even reflect on that context. Personally, I've heard enough of it. I like much better where the Twins are today without trading away good talent for a short-term rental. Good points, fair points, but this was sent even before some not-so-great news for the Twins on Wednesday, so I got to revisit a little bit of this. This isn't so much a trade deadline diatribe so much as it is, here's a reflection of where the Twins are now. Here's what happened on Wednesday. Joe Ryan, who's been excellent for them this year, you cannot foresee injuries. I get that. I know that, but they have been extraordinarily lucky, maybe not the right word, but they've been fortunate at the top of their rotation for the last couple of years to have had basically all of their guys for almost the entire season. Ryan had that groin injury last year that he pitched through. Wasn't quite the same until he kind of came back from that, but Pablo Lopez has been healthy. Bailey Ober, by and large, has been healthy. Sonny Gray last year, by and large, was healthy. And this year, like I said, Lopez, Ryan, and Ober, you could count on those three guys at the top of the rotation for all of this season so far. Even if they weren't having the greatest, outings all the time, Pablo Lopez has struggled to regain the form he had last year. He was taking the ball every time, getting out there, taking his turn. You knew what you were going to get, and that was a big deal because the rest of the rotation was in flux. Chris Paddock has been a little bit up and down with his performance, and now he is hurt. They've got great fortune to discover what Simeon Woods-Richardson could do for them, although he's had a couple rough outings lately. David Festa, another rookie, has stepped into the rotation. So you had basically those three guys at the top of the rotation right now and two rookies. You have very little margin for error. So what happens Wednesday? Joe Ryan, in his start at Wrigley Field, has to leave in the third inning with discomfort in his triceps, his throwing triceps. He tried to throw a splitter. The velocity was down on his split finger fastball on Wednesday, and that didn't go well. They were, the Twins, I think, were up in the game when he left, 2-1, and that turns into a disaster because the only guy they got at the trade deadline, Trevor Richards, comes in and makes a mess of it. Walks a whole bunch of batters. He walked 5 hitters. He only recorded 2 outs. 5 walks, 2 outs. Throw in a wild pitch in there. Just a disaster of an outing for Trevor Richards. Again, the only guy they got at the trade deadline. So there's your trade deadline kind of rant that they didn't get anybody, better than Trevor Richards, and he had a poor outing. I mean, it's just one outing, but also that they weren't able to bolster their starting rotation, even though they wanted to at the deadline. And again, Rich makes a good point. We don't know what the market held. We don't know what teams were asking the Twins. We don't know kind of what the price to pay was, whether it was worth it, things like that. What we do know at this point is that even going into the deadline, their depth was precarious, right? Their depth was precarious. It was those three guys at the top and then two rookies. They'd already cycled through some other veterans. The guy they got in the offseason, Anthony DeSclafani, never pitched a game for them because he came down with an injury right away. Chris Paddock, who they were hoping for, to have a bounce back year. He's had some stints on the injured list. They don't know what else they'll get from him down the stretch. So now they're in a situation where Joe Ryan had to leave this game. They're probably looking at having to put him on the injured list. You would have to think, even if it's not terribly serious, there's going to be this, cautious approach to it. He's probably going to miss a few starts, you would imagine, at least. So now where do they go? Well, they've got a huge stretch of games coming up. They've got Cleveland for 4 games starting Friday. Cleveland, the division leader, although if there was one slice of good news on Wednesday, it was that Cleveland continues to tumble. They lost a doubleheader to Arizona, so the Twins actually gained a half game on Wednesday, even though they lost to the Cubs. Twins 3.5 back going into this series against Cleveland, so still right there within striking distance, but they're going to pitch Louis Varland in one of these games of a doubleheader on Friday in this huge series against Cleveland. You've got other rookies, like I said, David Festa, Simeon Woods Richardson in the mix right now. And you've got the potential to maybe go get Zebby Matthews, this prospect they have who's increased his velocity, doesn't walk anybody. He could be into the mix in the rotation down the stretch too if they need him. But that's like 3 rookies potentially plus Louis Varland, depending on where their health is, stuff like that they're counting on down the stretch of a pennant race. They're right in the wild card mix, would be a wild card team if the season ended today. Decent chance still to win the division. You got 49 games left in the season, and you're going to be suddenly counting on a lot of young arms. Now, sometimes the young arms are just as good or better than anybody you could have gotten at the trade deadline. So this is not so much a trade deadline rant again, Rich, as it is a look at where they are overall and just kind of the bad timing of all this and kind of not having the depth to be prepared for this. I wanted them to get a starting pitcher before the start of the season. I thought they were one starter short before the start of the season, and they were able, through luck and their own good planning, their own, good scouting, saying, hey, Simeon Woods Richardson is ready. David Festa can help us if needed, things like that. They did have enough to get through the first 4 months as long as the health of their big 3 held up. Now, it is not. And we don't know how long Joe Ryan's going to be out, right? We don't know how long this will linger, how long this, how serious this is. Rocco Baldelli sounded a little bit, at least somewhat optimistic by the tone of voice that Joe Ryan was using yesterday when, kind of talking about what's going wrong, stuff like that. Like, hopefully for the Twins' sake, for everybody's sake, for Joe Ryan's sake, this is just an issue of, hey, something hurt, it'll go away with rest, and maybe he can, take his turn in a couple of weeks and, be ready for the stretch run. The tough thing for the Twins, like I said, is this is a very important stretch of games. They've got a bunch of games against winning teams coming up. They still have 8 games left against Cleveland before the end of the season, including these 4 here at Target Field this weekend. They've got Kansas City right after that. Kansas City is right behind them in the wild card race. They're only 4 out of the AL Central lead, a half game behind the Twins. They are right there as well. A tough time to be dealing with pitching depth injuries. And oh, by the way, Carlos Correa, who's been out for almost a month now. I think the last time he played was July 12th, almost a month. We were told at the time they were hoping this latest bout of plantar fasciitis was not serious in his other foot, but he has not played in about a month, and he is not expected to rejoin them for this series against Cleveland. So a lot of their best players, one of their best starting pitchers, not in the mix right now. It's a tough time. Their depth will be tested in ways that it hasn't been tested for a while, and we will see where they come out of this on the other side. Like I said at the beginning of the show, I want to take some time today to talk about Tim Walz as a football coach. Obviously, had a high profile in Minnesota already before this week, but now has been propelled into the national spotlight. You may have heard that Kamala Harris has picked him as her running mate on the Democratic ticket for president and vice president this year. Walz has a long history as an educator and as a coach. So the Walz and Harris are playing this up. They're playing up the coach angle. If their introductory kind of rally in Pennsylvania a few days ago was any indication.
To his former high school students, he was Mr. Walz. And to his former high school football players, he was Coach.
For nearly 20 years, I had the privilege of teaching high school social studies and coaching football. Including winning that state championship. Thank you. Don't ever close the yearbook. Don't ever.
Now, Tim Walz was more than just a football coach, more than just an assistant football coach. I think he was a girls basketball coach. He coached middle school runners, I do believe. So not just football, but what he is known most for in the coaching circles is that 1999 Mankato West football team. He was an assistant coach on that staff. Team kind of went from, disappointment a few years ago, hadn't won a whole lot of games, had a long losing streak, to kind of building up during the first couple of years he was there, to winning a state title in 1999. So I wanted to talk to Rick Sutton, the former Mankato West head coach who hired, he was the head coach when Tim Walz was hired as an assistant. Wanted to talk to him about kind of what Tim Walz was like as a football coach. This is not political, like I said. This is more about the football aspect, a little bit of X's and O's, what he was like as a, how he came to this position at Mankato West, and some of that backstory of the 1999 Mankato West football season with Rick Sutton. So let's bring him in for a conversation right now. Rick, glad to have you on the show today. How are you doing with all, as much as Tim Walz is getting a lot of newfound attention, I've seen your name pop up a few times already in some interviews. You must be getting a little bit more attention than you're used to at this point in the summer as well.
Oh, first of all, thanks for having me. And it's been an interesting couple of days. My daughter's offered to be my press secretary, and I'm almost to the point where I might need one.
That's exactly right. A sudden uptick in interest in late 1990s Mankato West football. You were the head coach back then. Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, already a very well-known name, at least locally, at least in Minnesota, became a national name, of course, in the last couple of weeks, and especially the last couple of days, as he was selected, of course, as the Democratic running mate for Kamala Harris. Let's. I want to talk football. This is not a political show. I want to talk football. Kind of how he came to be on the staff, what kind of coach he was, things like that. From what you remember, 25 years ago now at this point.
Sure. Well, Tim first came to Mankato. He and Gwen were teaching and coaching out in Nebraska, and Gwen is actually from southwestern Minnesota originally, and they wanted to get closer back to family. And so it just so happened that at West we had both an English job and a social studies job open. So they interviewed, and after they interviewed, our principal at the time, John Barnett, gave me a call and said, I think you need to talk to this guy. I think we got a real good candidate for a football coach. So they moved to town in very early June, and I guess I wouldn't really call it an interview. It was more of an informal conversation. And anyone who's met Tim knows that within a few minutes he's your best friend in the world, and it was very obvious right from the start that he was going to be a great fit for our staff.
What year was that?
That would have been 1997.
Okay. So, and the program was, I guess at this point we can say it was building up to something great. At that point, though, you were in the midst of some struggles, right? As you were trying to get things going and turn things around, at least from a wins and losses standpoint.
Yeah, I had been there 3 years at that point, and in those 3 years, we struggled mightily. We were not a very good football program when we first got there. For several years beforehand, they had struggled as well. I think as I think about it, one of the things that was the most difficult about trying to build it was just how low the expectations were. The players' expectations were low. The faculty expectations were low. The community expectations were low, and so that was kind of the first thing was, how do we build and say, we can do great things here, and that was probably the biggest struggle throughout the whole thing.
What was then well, let's start here. What was Tim Walz's role on the staff as an assistant? Offense, defense, or it sounds like maybe a little bit of both?
Okay, yeah, at the time on our staff, we had four varsity coaches on the staff at that time, and so we all coached both sides of the ball. But Tim's strong point is the defensive side, and he came in that first year as linebackers coach, and then was in I believe '98, the very next year, was promoted to the defensive coordinator.
Okay, so in 1999, as things are ramping up as what would become your state championship season, he's the defensive coordinator. Tactically first, I love people are going to want to know like X's and O's here. So what kind of defense is he running? What kind of stuff are you guys running 25 years ago that got you where you needed to go?
Our base defense was a 4-4, playing in the conference at the time. Big Nine was very heavily run conference, and so we knew we had to have people in the box to stop the run. But we also, at times, especially against teams that were more option-oriented, would run some 4-3. And so at that time, it would be particularly Mankato East was a very good option team at the time. In the state semifinals, we played Northfield, who was a lot of option stuff. And so we played some 4-3 in some of those games as well.
So your game planning, what kind of schematic, what kind of stuff is he talking about? I know it's a long time ago, but what do you remember about that piece of things?
Well, the big thing we tried to do was look at not just scheme but personnel. Who were the plays that we had to stop, but also who were the players that we had to stop. And so we would build the game plan around both of those two factors.
Okay. So 1999, if I'm remembering right, I went back and read a story. I think it was maybe a 10-year reunion story that I think was in the Mankato paper. You guys start out 2-4, but you're playing a lot of big schools, right? The Big Nine's got that's a lot of the Rochester schools, right? And you got a lot of the bigger schools in there. You're a class 4A team at the time, which is the second biggest class at the time. It was 5A was the biggest class back then. Things have changed since then. I actually went back. I covered a lot of high school football for the Star Tribune back then. I wanted to know if I had covered that game. I don't think I did. I would have remembered it, I'm sure, too, if I had covered the championship game. But you start out 2-4, but it sounds like maybe there was still some optimism even within that 2-4 start.
Definitely. And I think actually to get a real historical picture of it, I kind of think it really started in 97.
Okay.
97 was the first year that we had added the class and went to 5A and 4A. And those first 3 years when we were really struggling and we were in AA, the biggest class, we didn't make the playoffs. And so in 97, when we added that class and we got into the playoffs and we were able to win our first playoff game. And I think that was kind of the catalyst that got things going and got our players to see if we're on a playing field where we're playing against schools the same size, we have an opportunity to be successful. So that was kind of the start of it. I believe 1998, we also had a very good football team, but we lost two quarterbacks. And really had some struggles through the middle of the year. We ended up 6-5 and got to the section final game. And so, I kind of lived for a lot of optimism. We went through a lot of struggles and we were still one game away from going to state. So that kind of built into 99. Okay. And our players definitely saw the opportunity to be a state tournament team. Without a question, their goal was to make it to the Metrodome. And then, as talked about, we start the season 2-4. And a big part of that was our 4 losses were all to schools that were 5A schools.
Yep.
I think one of the key things that kind of triggered it was our Monday meeting after that week 6 game. We just sat down and all the coaches, myself, Tim, Tom Boone, Aaron Miller, we all kind of talked about, this is where we're at. These are the things that we've done that are good. We're getting better. We're improving. We're playing everybody tough. And our goals are still there. Give our players a lot of credit. They trusted in us, they believed in us, and they carried forward. And from that point on, we kind of said, from here on out, last 2 regular season games, then playoffs, we're only going to be playing 4A schools. Yeah. We went on a run from there, won 8 in a row, and there we go.
Tim Walz referenced that season in his 2021 State of the State address. This was during COVID, and I believe he gave this address from Mankato West. Kind of goes into detail about the season.
To some, it seemed that everything was stacked against us, but our team never lost hope. And neither did the fans. The stands remained full of our community, enthusiastically cheering us on. And each week we got just a little bit better. We approached each practice, each play, and every down with a focus to improve. And we did, until one day we won. And we kept improving, and we kept winning. To the astonishment of everyone who had watched us at the beginning of the season, we qualified for the state playoffs. Our first game was against an undefeated team that had racked up state titles over the years. We were down in a close game with only seconds left in the first half, and we needed a goal line stand to keep the game within reach. Coach Sutton called a timeout, and I ran out onto the field to talk to the defense. Our team was huddled up, and I said, "You know how to do this. Everything this season has prepared you for this moment." I said, "Fellas, it's not often in life that you get a moment like this, one that can define you. This is your moment. This is our moment." I saw nods all around that huddle, and one player piped up and yelled, "I've got this. We've got this." The whistle blew, and we stopped the play for a loss. We went on to win that game, and then we won 2 more games to claim the state championship. I know we wouldn't have won that state championship if we hadn't lost at the beginning of the season.
How much do you remember of that moment and kind of the arc that he's building there?
I think that's 100% accurate. It was a great high school football game on the road, state playoffs. First time that West had ever been in a state playoff game against Totino Grace, who obviously has been a long time power in the state. And I don't think anybody except for us gave us a chance to win that game. The adversity that we had gone through during the course of the season, that arc of learning from those earlier games and iron sharpens iron. And we had played against very, very good 5A schools, and we felt very confident in our ability to physically play with anybody.
It's got to be kind of fun to hear something like that referenced in a State of the State address, 20 some years later. Is it just been kind of fun over the years? I mean, it's magnified now, but just to hear him sprinkle in little bits of that season or talk about that over the course of his political rise.
Yeah, definitely. When I can, I try to make it to some of Tim's events, some of the fundraising events, and some of the rallies and things. And it's always great to see Tim and see Gwen and kind of recount some of those things and remember just the thrill and the joy that season was.
I suppose more than just tactical stuff. You played a 4-4 system, stuff like that at the high school level. Especially for educators like you, I mean, you and Tim, it's, a lot of this is about communication, motivation. That seems to be his, some of his strong suits through his teaching career, but also through his rise here. Was that, something that came through with his approach with players back then?
No question. You watch Tim now and you see him on TV and you see this energetic guy who clearly has empathy for others and has the ability to build relationships. And in coaching, X's and O's obviously are important, but it's more about the relationships that you can build and the trust that you can foster with your team. And that's obviously always been one of Tim's biggest strengths. And so that dedication, that enthusiasm, that ability to get to know students on an individual basis is all a big part of that success.
You guys, if I remember right, I think I read 3 shutouts in your last 8 games of that 99 season. Does that sound right?
That sounds about right. you're
I know.
asking a guy's memory to go back a long way.
Well, it's kind of fun. It's the 25-year anniversary. I suppose you probably got to get some of that group back together again. And with this as an occasion, you never know. Well, that's a good number. It's an anniversary number, right?
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's a big one indeed. I'm really enjoying this conversation. Thanks to you, Rick, for joining me. Maybe just one kind of final thought about just the big picture of it all. When you think back on that season and winning the state championship, everybody's there, you're there, Tim's there. Like what memories come to you as you think about 25 years ago?
Oh, the thing I think about the most is just how tight that group of seniors particularly were, but also understanding that they had to bring the underclassmen into that and form that bond if they were going to have the success that they wanted to have. And the thing that I remember is just how much fun we had every day. Those guys loved each other. We loved them, and one of the big rallying points that we had as we got into the playoffs is every week you have to win so that you get a chance to be together for another week. And that was just so important to those guys to be able to have that keep going. And so just that camaraderie and that connectiveness that developed through that run was really special.
The fact that he was a coach, it seems to be being played up already. They introduced him as Coach Walz a couple times during some of the initial stuff. Yeah, that's got to be kind of fun, right?
Oh, for sure. It's obviously I've devoted my life to being a teacher and a coach, and to see that being recognized as something important in our society, and the traits that are important to being a leader in our society.
Rick Sutton, now the co-head coach down in Farmington, a long career at a lot of different places. You must be getting geared up for the start of practice next week, right?
Just before this, I was on a call with our offensive coordinator, kind of plotting out our install plan, and we're just really excited to get things rolling on Monday. It's that time of year where I always say that Sunday night is like Christmas Eve for coaches. It's just so exciting to have that opportunity to get rolling again.
Well, maybe all the media calls will be dying down a little bit by then, but I appreciate you taking the time to join me today, and best of luck this season to you guys.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Watch your dreams and savings grow with Royal Credit Union's 4.25% annual percentage yield 12-month certificate. Open now at any Royal office or online at rcu.org/certificate saver. Early withdrawal penalties could reduce earnings and principal. APY accurate as of 2/1/25. Insured by NCUA.
Really appreciate Rick's time. I know he's been inundated with calls, the sudden interest in the 1999 Mankato West football team that he could not have. He probably could have foreseen it as Tim Walz rose in the spotlight over the last few weeks, but the flurry of interest in finding out a little bit more about Tim Walz. So I appreciate his time and his perspectives, to say the least, on today's show. Let us finish with the cooler. Tim Walz was one of many people to tweet or talk about Naz Reid in this past year. The Timberwolves and the governor's office even had like a proclamation about the Timberwolves when they were in the playoffs, and one of the proclamations was simply Naz Reid. Got to thinking about Naz as I was reading a Slam magazine profile of him. Good piece, by the way. You should go check that out. Cover story on Naz, the popular Timberwolves player, 6th man of the year, on what we still would consider right now a team-friendly, a market-friendly deal this season. He signed it, an off-season ago. There was some question about whether they'd be able to keep him. Signed him to a 3-year, $42 million contract. This is the second year of it. The third year of it is a player option. We have to keep that in mind. He has a player option for the 2025-26 season. So does Rudy Gobert. His is a little bit more expensive at around $46 million. I believe Naz's comes in around a third of that. Karl Anthony Towns also will be making mega bucks that season. Thinking about what Naz's value, what his worth might be after this season, and when the Wolves will be forced probably to make a decision on their 3 big men. It works for now because Naz is not making big money. If he has another year like the one he had last year, he will be in line for a hefty raise. And you will already have Gobert, thinking about an extension or thinking about something different with his option, perhaps, that player option, and whether you want to keep going down that road. Karl Anthony Towns, of course, he's been the subject of trade rumors at certain points, whether they would keep him. But at a certain point, you're not going to be able to keep all 3, I don't think. If Naz gets a raise of another, let's say his next contract is $20 to $25 million. Let's say it's $25 million, making another $10 million more. You're already talking about luxury tax stuff. That's kind of looming down the road. So some thoughts to think about. This year does feel still like it will work out. You don't want to look too far ahead. This is a team built to win right now and built to win in the future with some of the moves they've made this offseason. But Naz Reid, a decision on his future maybe coming sooner than we might think. If you have to consider that option he has in his contract and what he might be worth next year if he has another season like he had a year ago. That will do it for me today. More Twins talk coming up on Friday's show. Expecting to have Bobby Nightingale Jr. from the Star Tribune on to recap what happened in Chicago, the Joe Ryan news. Still no Carlos Correa. Big 4-game series against Cleveland coming up. Lots to talk about the Twins, so Bobby and I will get to that on Friday's show. Until then, I am Michael Rand. Have a great rest of your day. Back at it again tomorrow.